The massive space station called Unity's Hope floated in the darkness of space like a giant metal flower. Its crystal dome sparkled with lights from 47 different worlds. Inside this dome, the most important meeting in the galaxy was about to begin. Data Ambassador Jake Morrison walked through the long corridors of the station. His black shoes made soft sounds on the metal floor. Behind him, Colonel Lisa Hayes kept pace with her military walk. Her uniform was perfectly pressed, and her hand stayed close to her weapon out of habit. Dr. Peter Kim hurried to keep up with them, carrying a bag full of data tablets and research files. "Remember," Jake said as they walked, "we're still the new kids here. Most of these species have been doing this for thousands of years. We've only been part of the galactic community for 15 years. Lisa nodded, but kept her eyes moving, watching for any threats. "Just because we're new doesn't mean we're weak," she said quietly. Peter adjusted his glasses and looked nervous. "I still can't believe we're actually here. When I was a kid, we didn't even know aliens existed. Now I'm about to sit in a room with beings from across the galaxy." They reached the main assembly hall, and Jake stopped to look through the entrance. The room was enormous, with a curved ceiling that showed the stars outside. Tables were arranged in a perfect circle, each one designed for different types of beings. Some tables had water tanks for aquatic species. Others had special atmosphere bubbles for creatures that breathed different gases. "Showtime," Jake said with a small smile. The human delegation took their seats at a modest table near the middle of the circle. Their section looked plain compared to the others. The Vrex Empire had brought a massive stone table that looked like it belonged in a war room. The Whisperwind beings sat at tables made of pure light that shifted and moved like living things. The deep current species had huge water tanks, where they floated and communicated through flashing colors on their skin. Jake looked around the room and counted the different species. Tall reptilian beings with scales that changed color when they talked. Insect-like creatures that moved in perfect coordination with each other. Beings made of what looked like living crystal that reflected light in beautiful patterns. Some species looked almost human, while others were so alien that Jake couldn't even figure out which end was their head. The meeting began with a deep voice that seemed to come from everywhere at once. "The Galactic Council will now come to order. Today we discuss trade routes, territorial disputes, and resource allocation." Jake settled into his chair and opened his tablet. Lisa sat perfectly straight, her eyes constantly moving around the room. Peter took notes on everything he saw, fascinated by the different alien technologies and communication methods. The first few hours were boring. Representatives talked about shipping costs and trade agreements. The Centauri Federation complained about pirates near their borders. The Hive Mind Collective wanted permission to expand into 3 new star systems. The ethereal beings spoke in riddles that nobody understood, but everyone pretended to respect. Jake found himself studying each species while they talked. The Vrex were clearly warriors. Everything about them screamed military strength. They wore armor even to diplomatic meetings and spoke in short, aggressive sentences. Their leader was a 7-foot-tall purple giant with scars across his face and arms, like tree trunks. The Whisperwind were the opposite. They seemed to be made of pure energy contained in crystal shells. When they talked, their voices sounded like music. They moved slowly and gracefully, as if they had all the time in the universe. Jake noticed that other species seemed to respect them, maybe because they were so old and wise. The deep current fascinated Peter the most. They lived in the water tanks and communicated by changing the colors and patterns on their skin. Their translator turned these light shows into words, but Jake wondered what was lost in translation. They seemed to think differently than land-based. Species. As the meeting continued, Jake noticed that many species kept looking at the human table. Some looks were curious, Others were dismissive. The humans were still considered newcomers, barely worth attention. Most of these civilizations had been traveling between stars and humans were still living in caves. The first real argument started when the Vrex ambassador stood up. His massive form cast a shadow over several nearby tables. The Vrex Empire. Objects to the recent territorial claims made by the human government, he said in a voice like grinding stone. These claims overlap with traditional Vrex hunting grounds. Several other species murmured agreement. The insectoid hive mind drone's eyes changed from blue to yellow, which Peter had learned meant they were interested in conflict. The Shardborn. Delegate, a being that looked like a living prism, turned a deeper red color. Jake stood up slowly. He was much smaller than the Vrex ambassador, but he didn't seem intimidated. Ambassador Cruix, if I may, he said politely. The territories in question have been uninhabited for over 200 years. Our surveys show no current claims or activity. Survey all you want, Cruix growled. Those worlds belong to Vrex space. Your kind should learn their place in the Mai. Galactic order. More murmurs of agreement rippled through the assembly. Jake noticed that many species were nodding. The message was clear. Humans were too new, too young, too inexperienced to make demands of older civilizations. Lisa's hand moved, slightly toward her weapon, but Jake gave her a tiny shake of his head. Peter looked uncomfortable, shifting in his seat as the hostile attention focused on their table. The Whisperwind ambassador spoke next, their voice like wind chimes in a gentle breeze. Perhaps the young species would benefit from understanding. Established protocols before making territorial assertions. Even the diplomatic Whisperwind were suggesting that humans should back down. Jake felt the weight of dozens of alien eyes watching him, waiting to see how the human would respond to being put in his place. The hive mind. Drone spoke in its mechanical voice. The collective agrees. New species must demonstrate worthiness before claiming equal status with established civilizations. Jake looked around the room calmly. He saw species that could destroy Earth with their advanced technology. Beings that had conquered entire star systems. Civilizations that had been exploring the galaxy for millennia. They all seemed to agree that humanity needed to be humbled. But Jake Morrison had not become Earth's chief diplomat by backing down from difficult situations. He had earned his position through years of negotiating with world leaders, corporate executives, and military commanders. He had learned that sometimes the best response to aggression was calm confidence. I appreciate everyone's input, Jake said, his voice carrying clearly through the chamber. And I certainly understand the concern about maintaining established order. He paused and looked directly at Cruix. But I think there might be some misunderstanding about humanity's approach to galactic relations. The room fell quiet. Even the usually chattering Quicksilver delegation stopped their rapid-fire communications to listen. Jake smiled, the same easy smile he used when dealing with difficult negotiations back on Earth. You see, we've been preparing for this conversation for quite some time. Cruix snorted dismissively. 15 years is not a long time to prepare for anything. True, Jake agreed, but we're very efficient learners. He looked around the room again, his expression calm and confident. In fact, we've been quite thorough in our preparation. Some might say overly thorough. Lisa and Peter exchanged glances. They knew that tone. Jake was about to say something. That would change the entire dynamic of the meeting. We've studied each of your civilizations quite carefully, Jake continued. Your histories, your cultures, your technologies, your military capabilities. We found it all quite fascinating. The temperature in the room seemed to drop a few degrees. Representatives began to pay closer attention to the small human delegation. Jake adjusted his tie, a habit he had when he was about to deliver important news. In fact, We've been so thorough that we've developed comprehensive contingency plans for every possible scenario involving every species present today. The silence that followed was absolute. Even the background hum of the station's systems seemed to quiet down. Jake's casual words had just changed everything. The silence in the great assembly hall stretched on for what felt like hours. Jake Morrison stood calmly at his table, seemingly unaware that he had just dropped a diplomatic bomb into the middle of the galactic community's most important meeting. Ambassador. Cruex was the first to recover from the shock. His purple face darkened to an almost black color, and his massive hands clenched into fists. Did you just say you have contingency plans for every species here? Jake looked genuinely surprised by the question. Well, yes. Doesn't everyone? He glanced around the room as if expecting nods of agreement. I mean, it's just basic diplomatic preparation. The Whisperwind ambassador's crystal shell began to flicker rapidly, changing from its usual calm blue to an agitated yellow. When? They spoke. Their musical voice had a sharp edge to it. Ambassador Morrison, please clarify what you mean by contingency plans. Oh, you know, Jake said, waving his hand casually. The usual stuff. Economic scenarios, military possibilities, diplomatic strategies. Just thinking through different situations that might come up. Dr. Peter Kim felt sweat beading on his forehead. He had worked with Jake for 3 years, and he knew that tone. It was the same voice Jake used when he was about to reveal something that would make everyone uncomfortable. Colonel Lisa Hayes kept her expression neutral, but inside she was calculating distances to exits and counting the number of security personnel in the room. Her military training told her that the situation was about to become dangerous. The hive mind drone's compound eyes shifted from yellow to red, indicating high stress levels. When it spoke, its mechanical voice carried an undertone of threat. Explain the nature of these military possibilities. Jake consulted his tablet, scrolling through files with the same casual interest he might show while checking the weather. Well, let's see. For the Hive Mind Collective, we've identified 17 primary attack vectors and 32 defensive strategies. The key weakness appears to be the communication network between your drones. The entire Hive Mind delegation froze. For a species that prided itself on perfect coordination and shared consciousness, having their communication network identified as a weakness was deeply unsettling. You studied our communication systems? The drone asked. Of course, Jake replied. We studied everyone's systems. It's really quite fascinating how different species solve similar problems. The Vrex, for example, rely heavily on personal honor and chain of command. Very traditional military structure. Easy to predict, but also very effective when properly motivated. Cruex's hand moved to the ceremonial weapon at his side. You dare analyze Vrex military doctrine? Analyze might be too strong a word, Jake said thoughtfully. We prefer to think of it as careful observation, like watching how someone plays chess to understand their strategy. The Shardborn delegate, who had been silent until now, suddenly flared bright red. Their crystalline form cast dancing lights across the ceiling as they spoke. Ambassador Morrison, the Shardborn Collective demands to know what observations you have made about our people. Jake looked pleased to be asked. The Shardborn are particularly interesting. Your crystal matrix bodies make you nearly indestructible by conventional weapons, but you're vulnerable to specific frequency disruptions. We've identified 43 different harmonic frequencies that could potentially shatter your physical forms. The Shardborn delegate's color shifted to a deep, angry crimson. Such knowledge is classified information. How did you obtain it? Oh, we didn't obtain it, Jake said cheerfully. We figured it out. Humans are very good at finding weaknesses. It's sort of our specialty. The deep current ambassador's pool began to bubble violently. The colors flashing across their skin were rapid and chaotic. Their translator struggled to keep up with the rapid communication. The deep current species wishes to know what weaknesses you believe you have identified in our people. Peter Kim found himself reaching for his emergency communication device. This was spiraling out of control, faster than anyone had anticipated. Jake consulted his tablet again. The deep current are actually one of our more challenging scenarios. Aquatic species present unique problems for land-based conflicts. However, we've identified several approaches. Water supply contamination, thermal shock tactics, and atmospheric pressure manipulation are the primary strategies. You would poison our water? The deep current ambassador's colors flashed angry red and orange patterns. Only if absolutely necessary, Jake said, as if discussing the weather. We'd much rather solve problems through negotiation. But you asked about contingency plans, so I'm being thorough. The ethereal collective's representative, a being of pure thought who rarely participated in physical discussions, suddenly manifested in the room. Their appearance was like a shimmering heat wave in the shape of a person. The ethereal collective finds this discussion most disturbing. You speak of warfare against beings you have never fought. That's exactly the point, Jake said, looking pleased that someone understood. We plan for conflicts we hope never to have. It's much better to be prepared and never need the plans than to need them and not have them. Colonel Hayes decided it was time to help her ambassador. She stood up and activated her own tablet. If it helps, we have similar contingency plans for natural disasters, economic collapse, and alien invasions. It's just how humans think. Alien invasions? The Whisperwind ambassador asked, their voice carrying a note of confusion. But you are already in contact with alien species. Yes, but what if new ones show up? Hayes replied logically. What if they're hostile? What if they have technology we've never seen before? We like to think through these possibilities in advance. The Vrex ambassador had been getting angrier throughout the conversation. His massive form towered over the other delegates as he stood up. You speak of planning for war while sitting at a peace conference. This is the behavior of a hostile species. Jake's expression became more serious for the first time. Ambassador Cruex, may I ask you something? How many wars has the Vrex Empire fought in the last 1,000 years? 47 glorious campaigns, Cruex replied proudly. And how many of those wars did you plan for in advance? All of them, naturally. The Vrex do not fight unprepared. Exactly, Jake said with a smile. You plan for wars you intend to fight. We plan for wars we hope never to fight. The difference is that you're planning for offense, and we're planning for defense. The Quicksilver delegation, known for their rapid-fire communication style, suddenly burst into their characteristic high-speed chatter. Their translator worked frantically to keep up with the overlapping conversations. The Quicksilver Collective expresses concern about the implications of human strategic thinking, the translator announced. They wish to know if humans have planned for scenarios involving their species. Jake looked genuinely apologetic. I'm afraid the Quicksilver plans are particularly complex. Your communication speed and mobility make you very difficult to counter. We've had to develop some rather creative solutions. Creative how? Came the rapid response. Well, we've identified that your high-speed communication creates specific electromagnetic signatures. We've developed jamming techniques that could theoretically disrupt your coordination. We've also designed containment fields that could slow down your movement to manageable speeds. The Quicksilver chatter became even more frantic. Their translator was struggling to keep up with the rapid conversation. Dr. Kim decided he needed to intervene before things got completely out of hand. He stood up and cleared his throat. If I may, he said nervously, I think there might be some misunderstanding about human intentions. The room turned to look at the scientist. He adjusted his glasses and continued. Humans have a saying, hope for the best, prepare for the worst. We're not planning to attack anyone. We're just trying to be ready in case someone attacks us. The ethereal representative's form flickered with what might have been amusement. Dr. Kim, your species has developed military strategies against every civilization present. How is this defensive preparation? Because we're thinking about what we would do if you attacked us, Peter explained. We're not thinking about how to attack you first. There's a big difference. Jake nodded approvingly. Dr. Kim is absolutely right. All of our contingency plans are reactive, not proactive. We're not planning to start fights. We're planning to finish them. The hive mind drone's eyes had shifted to a deep purple, indicating confusion mixed with concern. This distinction is not clear to the collective. Planning to finish fights requires the same knowledge as planning to start them. That's true, Jake admitted, but the intent is completely different. We study your military capabilities so we can defend against them, not so we can overcome them in an attack. Colonel Hayes decided to add her perspective. In human military doctrine, we call this defensive contingency planning. We identify potential threats and develop responses. It's standard practice for any responsible military force. But you have developed these plans for allies as well as potential enemies, the Whisperwind ambassador observed. Jake's smile became a bit strained. Well, that's because we've learned that today's ally might become tomorrow's enemy. Political. Situations change. Alliances shift. It's better to be prepared for all possibilities. The admission sent another wave of uncomfortable sill. The tension in the assembly hall had reached a breaking point. Representatives from dozens of species were staring at the small human delegation with expressions ranging from concern to outright hostility. Jake Morrison stood calmly in the center of it all, seemingly unaware that he had just revealed something that would change galactic politics forever. The Shardborn delegate was the first to break the uncomfortable silence. Their crystalline form had shifted to a deep orange color, casting strange shadows across the nearby tables. Ambassador Morrison, the Shardborn Collective requires specific information about these contingency plans. Jake tilted his head slightly, looking curious. What kind of specific information? How many scenarios have you developed for potential conflicts with our people? Jake consulted his tablet, scrolling through files with the same casual interest he might show while reading a menu. For the Shardborn specifically? Let me see. We have 62 primary scenarios, with about 400 sub-variations, depending on different factors. The number hit the assembly like a physical blow. 62 different ways to fight a single species. 400 variations on those methods. The scope of human planning was staggering. Dr. Peter Kim felt his stomach drop. He had known that human intelligence agencies were thorough, but even he hadn't realized just how comprehensive their planning had become. The deep current, ambassador's pool, began to bubble more violently. Their skin flashed rapid patterns of blue and red as they communicated internally. When they finally spoke through their translator, their voice carried a note of barely controlled anger. Explain these sub-variations, the translator announced. What factors require 400 different approaches? Jake looked pleased to be asked for details. Well, different planetary environments, obviously. Crystal beings behave differently in high-gravity situations versus low-gravity ones. Then there are atmospheric considerations, temperature ranges, available resources, population density, technological support systems. He paused to look at his tablet again. We also have to account for alliance scenarios. Would you be fighting alone, or would other species support you? Would the conflict be limited to space, or would it involve planetary surfaces? Are we talking about a formal war declaration, or more of a guerrilla situation? Colonel Lisa Hayes watched the faces around the room. Her military training told her to assess threats, and right now, she was seeing a lot of potential threats. The Vrex looked ready to start a fight immediately. The hive mind drones were making rapid calculations behind their compound eyes. Even the usually peaceful Whisper Wind seemed agitated. The ethereal collective's representative flickered more intensely. Ambassador Morrison, your species has been part of the galactic community for only 15 years. How did you develop such extensive strategic analyses in such a short time? Jake's smile became slightly proud. We're very good at learning quickly. Human intelligence agencies have been doing this kind of work for centuries. We just expanded our focus from other humans to other species. The Whisper Wind. Ambassador's voice carried a note of disbelief. You have been planning for conflicts with your own kind for centuries? Oh, much longer than that, Jake replied cheerfully. We've been fighting each other for thousands of years. We've gotten very good at it. The admission sent another wave of uncomfortable murmurs through the assembly. Most species had histories of internal conflict, but few spoke about it so casually. Hive Mind Drone's eyes had shifted to a deep purple, indicating maximum stress levels. The collective finds this information disturbing. Most species achieve unity before joining the galactic community. Unity is a strong word, Jake said thoughtfully. We prefer to think of it as managed competition. We still disagree about lots of things, but we've learned to settle our differences without destroying each other. Usually, Colonel Hayes added. Helpfully the qualification made several delegates shift uncomfortably in their seats. The Vrex ambassador had been getting angrier throughout the conversation. His massive hands were clenched into fists, and his purple skin had darkened to an almost black color. You speak of warfare as if it is a game. The Vrex understand honor in battle. What you describe is cowardice. Jake's expression became more serious. Ambassador Cruix, may I ask you something about Vrex military history? Ask. Your people have a reputation for honorable combat. Face-to-face battles, personal courage, traditional weapons. Is that accurate? Cruix's chest swelled with pride. The Vrex have never shown cowardice in battle. We face our enemies directly and defeat them through strength and skill. And how many Vrex worlds have been completely destroyed by your enemies? The question caught Cruix off guard. None. The Vrex Empire has never lost a homeworld. Exactly, Jake said quietly. Now let me tell you about human military history. We've developed weapons that can destroy entire continents. We've created diseases that could wipe out entire populations. We've built bombs that could crack planets in half. The assembly hall fell silent again. This was information that hadn't been in any of the public records about Earth. We've done all of this, Jake continued, not because we're evil, but because we learned that the only way to prevent total destruction is to be prepared for it. We call it mutually assured destruction. If everyone knows that starting a war means everyone dies, then nobody starts wars. The Quicksilver delegation burst into their characteristic rapid-fire communication. Their translators struggled to keep up with the overlapping conversations. The Quicksilver Collective expresses confusion about human logic, the translator announced. You create weapons of mass destruction to prevent their use? That's right, Jake confirmed. It sounds crazy, but it works. We went from fighting major wars every few decades to having relative peace for over a century. Dr. Kim decided to add some scientific perspective. From an evolutionary standpoint, it makes sense. Humans developed on a world where everything was trying to kill us. We learned to be more dangerous than our environment. Everything was trying to kill you? The deep current ambassador's colors flashed with what might have been sympathy. Well, not everything, Peter said. But our planet has some very dangerous life forms. Poisonous creatures, predators that could eat us, diseases that could wipe out entire populations, weather patterns that could destroy civilizations. He warmed to his subject, his nervousness fading as he talked about science. We had to become very good at identifying threats and developing countermeasures. It's not paranoia when the threats are real. The ethereal representative's form flickered, with what might have been understanding. Dr. Kim, are you suggesting that human strategic thinking is an evolutionary adaptation? Exactly, Peter said, pleased that someone understood. We evolved to be constantly aware of potential threats and to develop responses to them. It's built into how we think. The Whisperwind Ambassador's crystal shell had returned to its normal blue color, indicating calmer emotions. This explains much about human behavior. You form alliances quickly, but maintain detailed assessments of your allies' capabilities. We have to, Jake said. We've learned that situations change. Today's friend might become tomorrow's enemy. Today's enemy might become tomorrow's ally. We need to be ready for both possibilities. The Shardborn delegate's color had shifted to a thoughtful yellow. Ambassador Morrison, you speak of these contingency plans as if they are defensive measures. But detailed knowledge of an enemy's weaknesses is also useful for offensive actions. Jake nodded approvingly. That's a very good point. The same information that helps us defend against you could also help us attack you. That's why we're being so open about having these plans. The logic seemed backwards to many of the delegates. Colonel Haas saw the confusion on their faces and decided to explain. It's about deterrence, she said. If everyone knows that we've studied their capabilities and developed countermeasures, they're less likely to try attacking us. It's like showing your weapons to prevent a fight. The hive mind drone's eyes had shifted to a pale blue, indicating analytical thinking. This strategy requires that other species believe your countermeasures would be effective. They would be, Jake said simply. We don't make plans we couldn't execute. The confidence in his voice was unsettling. This wasn't boasting or bluffing. It was a simple statement of fact. The Vrex ambassador had been listening carefully to the conversation. His anger had cooled into something more like professional respect. Human, you speak of warfare like a craft to be mastered. Because it is, Jake replied. We've been studying warfare for thousands of years. We've made it a science. We've developed theories, tested strategies, and learned from our mistakes. And now you turn this science against us? Kruik said. No, Jake said firmly. We turn this science toward protecting ourselves from you. There's a difference. The deep current ambassador's colors had settled into a calm blue pattern. Ambassador Morrison, this conversation has been most illuminating. But we must ask, what do you hope to accomplish by revealing this information? Jake's smile returned. I hope to prevent misunderstandings. Some of you seem to think that humans were weak or naive. I wanted to make sure you understood that we're neither. You certainly are not, the Whisperwind ambassador said quietly. The mood in the room had shifted dramatic. The silence in the assembly hall stretched on as representatives from across the galaxy tried to process what they had just learned. Jake Morrison stood calmly at his table, waiting for the next question. He had revealed more than anyone expected, but he wasn't done yet. The Vrex ambassador was the first to break the silence. His massive form leaned forward, and his voice carried a note of professional curiosity rather than anger. Human Morrison, you claim to have developed strategies for defeating every species present. This is a bold claim. Jake nodded. It is. Would you like me to be more specific? Dr. Peter Kim felt his heart skip a beat. He had been hoping the conversation would move away from military details, not toward them. Yes, Kruik said simply. Tell me how you would defeat the Vrex Empire. Colonel Lisa Hayes tensed. This was dangerous territory. Revealing actual military strategies could be seen as an act of aggression. Jake glanced at his tablet, then looked back at the Vrex ambassador. Are you sure you want to hear this? It might change how you think about our relationship. I am sure. Jake took a deep breath. The Vreks are warriors. Your entire culture is built around honor, courage, and direct confrontation. Your military doctrine favors personal combat, with leaders leading from the front. Your supply lines are protected by honor guards rather than automated systems. Cruex nodded slowly. All of this was accurate. So our strategy would be to avoid giving you the kind of fight you want, Jake continued. We would target your supply lines, disrupt your communications, and generally make continuing the conflict more expensive than negotiating. Cowardly tactics, Cruex growled. Effective tactics, Jake corrected. We wouldn't try to outfight you in direct combat. We would try to make fighting us pointless. The hive mind drone's eyes had shifted to a bright yellow, indicating intense interest. Explain your assessment of the collective's vulnerabilities. Jake consulted his tablet again. The hive mind's greatest strength is perfect coordination through shared consciousness. But this creates a single point of failure. If we could disrupt your communication network, your individual drones would be unable to coordinate effectively. How would you disrupt our network? The drone asked. Electromagnetic interference focused on the specific frequencies you use for collective communication. We've identified 17 different frequency ranges that appear to be critical to your coordination. The entire hive mind delegation froze. The fact that humans had identified their communication frequencies was deeply disturbing. Without their shared consciousness, they would be helpless. The Shardborn delegate's crystalline form had shifted to a deep red color. And we always offer terms for surrender, Colonel Hayes added. The goal is to end conflicts as quickly as possible with minimum casualties. The Quicksilver delegation burst into their rapid-fire communication again. Their translator worked frantically to keep up with the overlapping conversations. A Quicksilver collective asks about contingency. Plans for their species, the translator announced. They wish to understand human assessment of their capabilities. Jake looked genuinely apologetic. The Quicksilver plans are actually some of our most complex. Your communication speed and mobility make you very difficult to counter. You can coordinate attacks faster than most species can respond. What countermeasures have you developed? Came the rapid response. Electromagnetic jamming, specifically tuned to disrupt your high-speed communication frequencies. Containment fields that could slow your movement to manageable speeds. And area denial weapons that don't require precise targeting. The Quicksilver chatter became even more frantic. Their translator was struggling to keep up with the rapid conversation. They want to know about these area denial weapons, the translator said. Jake hesitated for the first time. I'm not sure I should get into specific weapon systems. That might be crossing a line from defensive planning into offensive capability disclosure. The Vrex ambassador leaned forward. You have already crossed that line, human. Continue. Jake glanced at Colonel Hayes, who gave him a slight nod. Wide area electromagnetic. Pulse weapons. Gravity field generators that could affect large areas. Atmospheric manipulation to create zones that would be difficult for any species to operate in. The implications were staggering. These weren't just weapons designed to fight individual species. These were weapons that could control entire regions of space or planetary surfaces. Dr. Kim felt compelled to add context. These are all theoretical weapons based on our current understanding of physics. Most of them don't actually exist yet. But they could be built, the ethereal representative observed. Yes, Jake admitted. Given enough time and resources, most of our theoretical weapons could be constructed. The hive mind drone's eyes had shifted to a pale green, indicating deep analytical thinking. The collective wishes to understand the scope of human contingency planning. How many species have you analyzed? Jake consulted his tablet, scrolling through files. We have detailed assessments of all 47 species represented in this. Room. We also have preliminary assessments of about 200 other species we've encountered through diplomatic channels or intelligence gathering. The number hit the assembly like a physical blow. 247 different species, analyzed for potential conflict scenarios. The Shardborn delegate's color had shifted to a deep purple, indicating extreme concern. Ambassador Morrison, this level of strategic analysis suggests that your species views conflict as inevitable. Not inevitable, Jake corrected, just possible. We've learned that the species that survive are the ones that prepare for possibilities, not the ones that hope for the best. The deep current ambassadors. Colors had settled into a thoughtful blue pattern. You speak of survival as if it is constantly threatened. Is this how humans view galactic relations? Jake considered the question carefully. We view galactic relations the same way we view any relationship. Most of the time, everyone gets along fine, but sometimes things go wrong. When they do, we want to be ready. This is a very dark view of the universe, the Whisperwind ambassador observed. Maybe, Jake said, but it's also a realistic view. How many wars have been fought in galactic history? How many species have been destroyed by conflicts they weren't prepared for? The question hung in the air. Everyone in the room knew the answer. Galactic history was full of species that had been unprepared for conflict. The ethereal representatives. Form flickered with what might have been understanding. Ambassador Morrison, you are suggesting that preparedness for conflict is a form of conflict prevention. Exactly, Jake said, looking pleased. If everyone knows that attacking us would be costly and difficult, they're less likely to try it. If everyone knows that we're prepared for any scenario, they're more likely to choose negotiation over confrontation. Colonel Hayes decided to add her military perspective. In human military theory, we call this peace through strength. The best way to avoid war is to be so well prepared for it that nobody wants to fight you. The Vrex ambassador had been listening carefully to the entire conversation. His anger had cooled into something more like professional respect. This is not honorable warfare, but it is effective strategy. We're not trying to be honorable, Jake said. We're trying to survive and protect our people. Honor is a luxury we can't always afford. The admission sent another uncomfortable ripple through the assembly. Most species had complex codes of honor that governed their behavior in conflict. Hive Mind Drone's eyes had shifted to a bright blue, indicating a new understanding. The collective begins to comprehend human logic. You sacrifice honor for effectiveness. We sacrifice many things for effectiveness, Jake said quietly. But we don't sacrifice our principles. We have rules we won't break, even in war. What rules? The Whisperwind ambassador asked. Jake's expression became very serious. We don't commit genocide. We don't torture prisoners. We don't target civilians deliberately. We don't destroy entire ecosystems unless there's absolutely no other choice. And if there is no other choice? The ethereal representative asked. Jake met their gaze steadily. Then we do what we have to do to protect our people, just like any other species would. The conversation had reached a crucial point. The other species were beginning to understand that humanity's approach to galactic relations was fundamentally different from anything they had encountered before. The deep current ambassador's colors flashed a complex pattern before the translator spoke. The deep current acknowledges the logic of human strategy. But we must ask, what assurance do we have that these contingency plans will remain defensive? Jake smiled for the first time in several minutes. The same assurance you have with any other species. Our word, our actions, and our mutual interest. In peaceful coexistence. And if circumstances change? The Shardborn delegate asked. Then we adapt, Jake said simply. That's what humans do. We adapt to new situations and new challenges. The assembly hall fell quiet again as everyone considered. the implications of what they had learned. The humans weren't just another species joining the galactic community. They were something new and potentially dangerous, but they were also something that might be necessary in a universe where conflict was always possible. D. The Shardborn Collective. Crystal-based life forms are vulnerable to harmonic disruption. Jack. The massive assembly hall had become eerily quiet. Representatives from 47 different species sat in stunned silence, trying to process everything they had learned about humanity in the past few hours. What had started as a routine diplomatic meeting had become a fundamental shift in how the galaxy viewed Earth's newest members. Jake Morrison looked around the room at all the alien faces staring back at him. Some showed fear, others showed respect, and a few showed something that might have been admiration. But all of them showed a new understanding of what humanity represented. The Vrex ambassador was the first to break the silence. His massive purple form leaned back in his chair, and when he spoke, his voice carried a note of grudging respect. Human Morrison, I must admit that I underestimated your species. Jake nodded politely. That was the point of this conversation, Ambassador Cruix. We wanted to make sure there were no misunderstandings about our capabilities. There are none now, Cruix said with what might have been amusement. The Vrex respect strength, even when it comes in unexpected forms. The hive mind drone's eyes had shifted to a calm blue color, indicating analytical acceptance. The collective has processed this information. We conclude that humans represent a new paradigm in galactic relations. Dr. Peter Kim felt some of his tension ease. The mood in the room was shifting from hostility to something more like cautious curiosity. The Whisperwind ambassador's crystal shell had returned to its normal peaceful blue glow. Ambassador Morrison, the Whisperwind have observed many species join the galactic community. Your approach is unique in our experience. We've been told that before, Jake said with a slight smile. Humans tend to do things differently. Indeed, the ethereal representative flickered. Most species join the galactic community seeking protection or resources. Humans appear to have joined while already prepared to protect themselves. Colonel Lisa Hayes decided to clarify that point. We joined because we wanted to be part of something bigger than ourselves. But we've learned that being part of a community doesn't mean you can stop being responsible for your own security. The deep current ambassador's colors had settled into a thoughtful pattern. This raises important questions about the nature of galactic cooperation. Can true cooperation exist when all parties are prepared for conflict? Jake considered the question carefully. I think it can. In fact, I think it might be the only way true cooperation can exist. When everyone knows that, betrayal would be costly for everyone involved. Trust becomes more valuable. The Shardborn delegate's crystalline form had shifted to a contemplative yellow color. Ambassador Morrison, you speak of trust built on mutual deterrence. This is a complex philosophical position. It's a practical position, Jake corrected. We've learned that trust without verification is just hope. Hope is nice, but it's not a survival strategy. The Quicksilver delegation burst into their rapid-fire communication again. Their translator worked to keep up with the overlapping conversations. The Quicksilver Collective wishes to understand human long-term intentions, the translator announced. Do you plan to share your strategic assessments with other species? Jake exchanged glances with Colonel Hayes and Dr. Kim. This was a question they had anticipated. We're willing to share some information, Jake said carefully. Not our specific plans, but our general assessments of threats and opportunities. We think everyone benefits when everyone has better information. What kind of threats? The Vrex ambassador asked. Jake activated his tablet and projected a holographic display above the table. The image showed a star map of the local galactic region. We've identified several potential problems that could affect everyone. Red dots appeared on the map, scattered across different star systems. These are locations where we've detected signs of aggressive expansion by unknown species. These are areas where resource conflicts seem likely to develop. And these are regions where we've observed unusual technological signatures that might indicate hostile alien activity. The assembly leaned forward to study the map. Even species that had been part of the galactic community for millennia were seeing information they didn't have. "You've been mapping threats to the entire galaxy?" the ethereal representative asked. "We've been mapping threats to ourselves," Jake corrected. "But threats to us are usually threats to everyone else too. We're all neighbors in this part of the galaxy." Dr. Kim stood up and activated his own tablet. "We've also identified some opportunities for cooperation. There are several technologies that could benefit everyone if we work together to develop them." A new set of images appeared in the holographic display. Advanced terraforming techniques that could create habitable worlds for multiple species. Communication technologies that could bridge the gap between different types of consciousness. Defensive systems that could protect entire star systems from external threats. The mood in the room began to shift again. The fear and suspicion were being replaced by curiosity and interest. The hive mind drone's eyes had shifted to a bright green, indicating excitement. A collective is interested in these communication technologies. Our current systems are vulnerable to disruption. That's exactly why we developed countermeasures, Jake said. But we also developed improvements. We could share both the vulnerabilities and the solutions. The Whisperwind ambassador's shell flickered with what might have been approval. This is a more constructive approach than merely preparing for conflict. We never wanted to prepare for conflict, Jake said sincerely. We wanted to prepare for peace. But preparing for peace means being ready to defend it. The Vrex ambassador had been studying the star map carefully. Human Morrison. Some of these threat assessments overlap with Vrex intelligence reports. We could share information to create a more complete picture. That's exactly what we were hoping for, Jake said with genuine enthusiasm. We're stronger when we work together. The deep current ambassador's colors flashed a complex pattern of blue and green. The deep current sees the wisdom in this approach. But we must ask, what guarantees do we have that shared information will not be used against us? Colonel Hayes stood up to address the question. The same guarantees you have with any alliance. Mutual benefit and mutual deterrence. If we betray your trust, you know exactly how to respond. The logic was sound, even if it was uncomfortable. Trust based on mutual deterrence wasn't the kind of trust most species preferred, but it was trust that could be relied upon. The Shardborn delegate's color had shifted to a thoughtful purple. The Shardborn Collective proposes a formal framework for information sharing, structured cooperation with built-in safeguards. We'd be very interested in participating in something like that, Jake said immediately. The ethereal representative flickered with what might have been amusement. Ambassador Morrison, you have turned a potential diplomatic crisis into a proposal for enhanced cooperation. That was always the plan, Jake admitted. We knew that revealing our contingency plans would be shocking, but we also knew that it would clear the air and let us move forward with honest relationships. The hive mind drone's eyes had shifted to a warm yellow, indicating satisfaction. The collective approves of this approach. Honest assessment of capabilities leads to more stable relationships. Over the next hour, the conversation shifted from suspicion and fear to practical discussions of cooperation. Species that had been ready to condemn humanity an hour earlier were now proposing joint research projects and information-sharing agreements. The Quicksilver delegation was particularly excited about communication technologies. The Vrex were interested in defensive systems. The Deep Current wanted to explore terraforming techniques. Even the mysterious ethereal collective expressed interest in collaborative research. As the meeting began to wind down, Jake Morrison stood up to address the assembly one final time. "I want to thank everyone for their patience today," he said. "I know this conversation was uncomfortable, but I think it was necessary. We've learned that honesty about capabilities can lead to better cooperation, not worse." He paused to look around the room. Humans have a saying, trust but verify. Today we've done both. We've been honest about our capabilities, and we've verified that this honesty can lead to stronger relationships. The Vrex ambassador stood up as well. The Vrex Empire acknowledges that humans are more formidable than we initially assessed. But we also acknowledge that they are more trustworthy. A species that prepares for every contingency is a species that keeps its word. One by one, other ambassadors stood to offer their own assessments. The Whisper Wind spoke of the value of honest preparation. The Deep Current praised the comprehensive nature of human planning. The Shardborn expressed respect for human thoroughness. As the delegates began to file out of the assembly hall, many stopped to speak with Jake Morrison. Some wanted to discuss specific cooperation agreements. Others wanted to learn more about human strategic thinking. A few simply wanted to express their respect for humanity's unique approach to galactic relations. Colonel Hayes and Dr. Kim flanked Jake as they prepared to leave. The colonel was pleased with how the meeting had gone, while the scientist was still amazed by how much had been revealed. "Do you think we showed them too much?" Dr. Kim asked quietly. Jake adjusted his tie, the same gesture he had made at the